It's the tragic story of 16-year-old Channelle Plaatjies from Smarty Town in Paarl East, South Africa.
Yeah, it's difficult but crucial. We're basing this entirely on the Street Talk source material provided.
Our goal here is to unpack what those sources present, the timeline, the really unsettling questions, the community's reaction.
And how this specific tragedy might shine a light on, well, bigger problems for vulnerable young people, and the system supposed to protect them. Again, only using what's in these sources.
Exactly. This isn't just a news recap. We're exploring the key points and, frankly, the challenging realities laid out in this material.
Okay, let's get into it. Starting with the day Channelle was last seen.
Right. The sources state that was May 14th, 2025. She left her home in Smarty Town.
But one of the first really concerning things the material highlights is the delay.
A big delay. She wasn't reported missing until May 28th. That's 2 weeks later.
And the reason given, according to the sources, was that her family reportedly thought she might have, run off before and assumed she'd just come back.
But the material really stresses how critical those 2 weeks were. Potentially losing vital evidence, leads going cold.
And it mentions this allowed a dangerous narrative to take hold.
Yeah, suggesting maybe this idea that, oh, she'll just return, maybe lessen the initial urgency. That seems to be the implication in the source. It hampered things right from the start.
That makes a grim kind of sense. But even with that official delay, the sources show the community in Smarty Town didn't wait.
No, absolutely not. It describes people immediately searching neighborhoods, forming search parties, really pushing authorities for answers.
So you have this incredible immediate groundswell from the community.
Yeah, you do. And the sources really contrast that with the perception of the official police response from SNCS, the South African Police Service.
How so? What does the material say there?
Well, it's criticized pretty harshly, described as sluggish at best. Yeah, and reactive instead of proactive. Questions pop up in the material about whether the resources put into it actually matched how urgent the situation felt to everyone else.
And the source mentions something about the relationship between police and townships generally.
It does. It calls policing in townships a fraught relationship, meaning tense, difficult.
Okay.
Fueled by, well, the material suggests a history of perceived neglect, maybe corruption, inefficiency, and in this case, a lack of clear communication from SAPS apparently just made that existing mistrust even deeper.
Which brings us to June 2nd, 2025. The community search efforts really ramp up then, right?
Yes, significantly. Volunteers, activists, they focused their search on a specific area.
And where was that?
Around Allandale Prison. The material describes it as this stark, imposing structure near Smarty Town.
And that's where the discovery happened.
Tragically, yes. A body found in a shallow grave near the prison walls on June 2nd. Forensic pathologists were called.
Awful. And while they were waiting for official autopsy results, the sources indicate it was presumed to be Channelle, based on location and everything.
That's what the material suggests, yes. Given the circumstances, the location of the search focus.
And that location itself, near the prison. The sources point out how deeply unsettling that is.
Very. It raises these really uneasy questions, highlighted right there in the material. Why there? Near a high-security facility.
Was it meant to send some kind of message? Or just hide the crime? Or maybe convenience for someone familiar with the area.
The sources definitely suggest that the choice of location feels deliberate, calculated. It's chilling to consider the implications of why there.
Which leads us directly to the person alleged in the material to be involved.
Channelle's boyfriend, 19-year-old Zachariah Malele.
Okay. And the sources reveal something truly shocking about him.
Extremely shocking. It states Malele was reportedly on parole.
For what?
For a prior murder conviction.
Wait, on parole for murder?
That's what the material explicitly states.
Wow. I mean, that detail alone. The implications are huge, as the sources suggest.
Yeah.
You immediately think about the parole authorities, their responsibility.
Exactly. What kind of monitoring was happening, what checks were in place. The sources definitely put a spotlight on those questions.
And it gets even worse, doesn't it? There's a claim about a confession.
A truly disturbing claim presented in the material, yes, that Malele allegedly confessed to killing Channelle.
Ow.
During a phone call, apparently made from jail.
From jail. And didn't he also allegedly tell them where the body was?
During that same call, yes. Allegedly directed authorities to the location. The sources point out that if this is true, it suggests, well, premeditation, a cold calculation. That's the phrase used.
Just awful. But despite these, incredibly dramatic details seemingly coming out,
Yeah.
the official police response is described differently.
Yeah, the SAPS response is characterized in the material as tight-lipped. Well, the sources note a lack of public announcements about arrests, no solid official confirmation of who the suspects are, few details, really, beyond just general appeals for information.
And that silence, according to the Muriel, is causing a lot of frustration.
Immense frustration for community members, for advocates. The argument presented is that transparency isn't just, nice to have, it's essential. For justice, yes, but also for rebuilding trust.
Especially where trust is already low, like you mentioned earlier.
Precisely. And the sources make another good point. When there's no clear official information, rumors and speculation just rush in to fill that vacuum.
Which must make it incredibly hard for everyone, especially the family, to know what's real and what isn't. Just adds to the pain.
Definitely compounds it. Now, if we step back a bit, the sources try to connect Channel's specific story to a bigger picture.
Right, they frame it as more than just one isolated case.
Yes. It says her story is a stark reminder of a larger crisis, an epidemic, really, of violence, exploitation, and neglect facing young girls in South Africa.
And it specifically mentions intimate partner violence in teenage relationships.
Critically so, suggesting it's often overlooked, maybe dismissed as just teenage drama, but this case shows, tragically, it can be deadly.
And Belili's alleged involvement, his history. The sources use that to highlight how toxic dynamics can spiral into fatal outcomes.
Exactly. And connecting back to that bigger picture, the material suggests this tragedy really exposes these cracks in systemic support structures.
What kind of cracks?
Things like the alleged failure in parole supervision we discussed, the perception of policing being reactive, not proactive, even potentially faltered communication within the family initially.
And the argument in the sources is that all these breakdowns sort of added up.
That's the powerful argument presented. Each breakdown contributed to what the material calls a preventable tragedy. It really makes you ask what systems were supposed to be there and where, according to this material, did they fail.
So as the investigation goes on, what are people demanding? What does the material say?
Well, the sources outline some clear demands coming from the community and advocates.
Like what?
First, transparency. A strong call for the police to give regular, clear updates to show justice is being pursued, swiftly and fairly.
Okay, that makes sense.
What else? Accountability. If the evidence points to Malili or anyone else, the sources stress the law needs to act. Swiftly, decisively.
I'm looking forward.
Community engagement. A need for authorities to actively rebuild trust, to actually partner with communities to protect vulnerable young people better in the future.
That seems crucial.
And finally, support for families. Recognizing that families like Channelle's need and absolutely deserve psychological support, counseling, and just basic acknowledgement in their fight for answers and eventually closure.
It's a lot. As the material concludes, Channelle Plaatjies. She wasn't just a headline or a missing person statistic. She was a daughter, a friend.
A symbol, really, of her community's hopes, and now their heartbreak.
Her death, as it's framed so powerfully in these sources, becomes this urgent call to action. For authorities, yes, but also for communities, for individuals.
A call to face some really uncomfortable truths and push for real systemic change.
And that image from the source material, the shallow grave near Allandale Prison, it's described as this sort of physical, haunting reminder.
A reminder of how deep these problems run, often just hidden below the surface until a tragedy like this rips everything open.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this story unfold through these sources? I think the material suggests justice isn't solely about punishment.
No, it's also fundamentally about truth, about healing, and about doing everything possible systemically, personally, to make sure no more young lives are lost like this, in silence or because systems failed them.
Which leaves us with a really important question drawing from this material. What role does community vigilance, actual communication between people and police, and deep systemic reform really play in preventing these kinds of tragedies from happening again?
That's definitely something to think about long after this conversation ends.